Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on our job is to safely raise and support the front of the truck so the wheels are off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. So now that the wheel's off, we have a nice clear view of our axle right along here. To be able to remove the axle, we're going to have to be able to grab onto this knuckle and then swing it out and away. So there's a couple things we're going to have to think about. When we swing it, we want to make sure that we're not putting a tug on our brake flex hose right here, or of course the ABS wire. I'm going to remove this mounting bolt right here, and then we'll come down here and remove the caliper bracket as well. Now remove your 2 caliper bolts. And then hang it safely aside so it's putting no pressure on your flex hose or your ABS wire. So we have more slack on our ABS wire. I'm just going to go ahead and pop this clip right here. Next, we're going to take off this center cover to expose the axle nut. Remove your cotter pin. Remove your locking clip. Use a 12-point socket. Remove your axle nut. Apply some penetrant in this area. Then use a hammer and a punch. Come right in the center here and break this free. Now we're going to move along the bottom area of the knuckle. You're going to find 2 mounting bolts. We're going to remove those, and that's going to make it so this can swing free. Now the next thing we want to do is grab on right here and press right there. We're going to try to push the axle out through the bearing as we pull this away. Once it's out, we'll just go ahead and slide the axle aside so we can let this down. Now follow that axle in and under your control arm here, and you're going to find where it goes into your front differential. We need to separate the axle from the front differential, but be careful because once you do that, there's always the possibility differential fluid could come out. Just going to reach up top, hold onto the axle as I start driving it out. Now let's come back out here, lift this up and away, and remove the axle from the truck. There it is, friends. Now with the axle out of the way, typically you're going to want to make sure that you replace your axle seal. If you're not replacing it, at least make sure that you clean it down and inspect it. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new axle. Let's go ahead and slide this out of the way. We'll line the axle up with the differential tubing. Start that shaft right in there. Once it's straight, we'll just give it a couple loving bonks with a rubber mallet and drive it in. Okay, so as you can tell, it completely bottomed out. I'm just going to give it a little tug. You want to ensure that it's definitely clipped in there. You don't want this popping out of the differential while you're driving down the road. Now before we go ahead and put the axle back into the bearing, let's just go ahead and put a little bit of copper never-sees along the splined area here. Now we're just going to carefully grab onto this, pull it away, we'll grab the axle, start it into the wheel bearing. Slide that right in. Now it's going to be time to put this area back together. If your control arm's sitting a little bit too low, just carefully put a jack underneath it and bring it up to where it needs to be. Now let's start putting in our bolts. I like to use red thread locker on these. Now let's start putting in our bolts. I like to use red thread locker on these. Then both started, let's go ahead and snug them up. Now we're going to torque both these bolts to 221 foot-pounds. Now let's take that caliper. We're just going to slide it right on over the rotor, being Now let's torque this to 79 foot-pounds. Do the same to the other one. Now let's get this back on here. Resecure that ABS wire. Now the next thing we're going to do is take that axle nut. We'll go ahead and start it on here. We're going to bottom this out and then we're going to torque it to 249 foot-pounds. Now to torque this axle nut, what you're probably going to notice is the whole thing wants to spin on you. To help prevent it from spinning, I just take a nice long pry bar, carefully come across the studs so I don't damage the threads, and then all the way down to the ground. That's going to hold this still, and then we can torque it to 249. Now with that torqued, let's go ahead and put on our lock here. I'm just going to line it up so that the slot lines up with the hole in the axle, slide through a locking cotter pin, and then pin it over so there's no way it can loosen up. All right, there's no way that's going anywhere. Now let's put our cap back on there. Make sure it's seated all the way around. Remove your lug nut. Let's get the wheel on here. Start all of our lug nuts, get the wheel on the ground, and then we'll torque the wheel to manufacturer's specifications. Now with your wheel, so it's just barely touching the ground, we're going to go ahead and torque these wheels. To torque the wheels, there's going to be two options depending on what type of wheel you have. If you have aluminum, like I have here, you're going to torque those to 97 foot-pounds. If you have the steel wheels, you're going to torque those lug nuts to 154. Torqued. Okay friends, we got the truck all back together. What's left to do now? Go ahead and pump up your brakes and then take your truck for a road test down to your local alignment shop.